Hello, this is the Smiling Conscious Traveler podcast. I am Ottmar Braunecker from Austria, and my guest today is Jodie Houlden from the UK. Jodie has a background teaching in further and higher education. Her academic studies have centered around human behavior and communication, more specifically in social science and linguistics. Her passion has been to study positive human potential from a range of perspectives. After many years of research and many mind-blowing insights, she has created a training and coaching through her program Get Set as her contribution to the human potential movement and the push for full disclosure. Welcome, Jodie, to my podcast. I'm so glad that you joined me today.
Thank you, Otmar. I'm over the moon that you invited me. Very happy to be doing this.
Yes, it was a very spontaneous way how we joined together today. It's just 2 days ago that we met each other. And
Absolutely.
I'm so happy that we found each other.
Yeah, me too. Very synchronistic.
So, yeah, just let's get into this topic first, because this is what really interested me most when I watched a part of your webinar, what you sent to me. And it was, I think, mainly about full disclosure. So let's explain this first. Well, explain me, please, first. What does full disclosure mean, actually?
Okay, so what we're seeing on the planet right now is there is various factions who would like to see the release of information that's been suppressed for some time, particularly around advancements that have been made technologically, that if they were applied to our modern economic systems would alleviate a lot of the stress for a lot of people. So the main one that people talk about is free energy. You know, the cost of powering our societies now that we are a technological species is astronomically high compared to what it could be if we moved from the current grid systems onto the free energetic devices that are available. There are many different types that have been devised.
Exactly.
So that is one focus. Now, it extends into the principles that have been used, the more advanced physics that transcend classical Newtonian physics that is still right now being taught as all that we know in mainstream education.
Yeah.
Because we have had behind the scenes some of the world's brightest minds when it comes to science and technology working on devices that not only utilize the principles for powering societies, but also in terms of healthcare modalities, so healing devices, age regression devices. They were the three main ones that I looked at in that webinar. It does extend beyond that into transportation and various forms of telecommunication. So travel could be far more expansive and speedy than what right now we utilize on the planet. So there's a whole range of different implications. Now, that's one aspect of it. What full disclosure looks at is there's a reason why there's been a suppression of the information and the sharing of these technologies.
Definitely.
And it wouldn't be fair to, you know, those of us living on the planet today to not have a full explanation as to how and why we've found ourselves in a position where certain parties, you know, certain ruling interests have chosen to only allow those developments and those advancements to benefit in a very concentrated and somewhat biased fashion. So what a full disclosure advocate would look like is someone that doesn't just want to talk about what exists and what the potentials are, but also let's have the full truth as to how we've ended up in a situation where people are struggling and suffering, and, you know, we've got poverty and disease and all this stuff, and these solutions haven't been provided to us. I think we've got a right to know that.
Of course, yeah. That is really a problem nowadays, that there's a lot of suppression from, I think it's mainly from government side or elites, how it's sometimes called. That is really a problem, and I think it's also limiting us somehow to get into our full potentials, at least as if we allow it to happen, that it limits us. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I you mentioned also, I think it was 0 point energy. That is a topic what really interests me a lot. And I didn't experiment with anything of this, but I watched a lot of videos about this. Do you have any idea, or can you explain me about this 0 point energy? Because this was really something what interests me most from these technologies. Or did you have any contact with it?
Okay, so what I would say is, because we've now reached a place where there is some disclosure happening, although it's on a partial level, there is different types of devices. So when we talk about 0 point energy, what we're really talking about is, at the most fundamental basis of reality, what we perceive to be empty space, what we experience in our physical forms as nothingness, is in fact a field of energy and information that is vacillating at such a subtle level that there's a whole lot of activity we don't perceive through, we don't see it, smell it, taste it, touch it. However, it sort of dates back to Tesla's times, where he had already begun to develop devices that could interact with and measure at that fundamental basis of reality all of the movement, the motion that was happening. And what was recognized is that it's so voluminous that if we could utilize that, rather than having what we currently use, the nuclear power and the burning of fossil fuels and whatnot, that's a very crude means through which to generate the electricity, the electrical power that we use for our current system. So what they recognize is, if we could find devices that could interact with that more fundamental basis, there would be energy that would be so vast that we would never suffer the kinds of shortages and what right now we worry about running out of oil, and we
scarcity
those types of
mindset
exactly.
all the time.
What they realize is that even in a tiny fraction of what we perceive to be empty space, there's such activity happening that to be able to utilize that, it could power societies for years and years and years. And so Tesla, to my knowledge, was the first person who succeeded in creating a device that essentially drew energy from the vacuum to power cars. And he had developed utilizing wireless ways through which, instead of having what we have right now with a grid system where you've got to plug things in and whatnot, you could transmit power from a distance. And a lot of his work was suppressed. What I know is that since his discoveries, there have been many inventors and scientists that have continued down that path and have sort of took the baton on, and from his works, his discoveries have adapted. And we've now got, I believe, there's 7 different approaches. What has been disclosed from a military perspective is a patent for what is classed as cold fusion. That's one type of device. So we know that's operational. We know that exists. It has been utilized, and there's no longer any doubt nor denial as to the existence of it. So if we were to move forward as a society and integrate what we call free energy devices, that would possibly be the first type of device that we'd have access to.
Yeah.
So by free energy, to sum it all up, really all that we're talking about is a device that can put out more energy than it requires to start it. So at the moment we operate on a system where we have to use a whole lot of power, and there's only so much of that we can utilize for the aims that we have, whether it's to, you know, light a room or have a TV playing or use the cooker or whatever it might be. There's only, for every so many joules of energy that we put in, we only get so many, a fraction of those back out. The free energy devices work in the opposite direction, where it only takes a small amount of power to get it going, and it generates a whole lot more power from it. So you're always then in excess rather than loss. Yeah. So that's.
I just remembered something before when you were talking about Nikola Tesla. I watched a video recording from a UFO conference, and I think the guy who was speaking was called Ralph Ring, and he was actually in contact with a guy named Otis. I don't know his full name now, and he was actually. It is Otis met actually Nikola Tesla before he died. And Nikola Tesla, they met in a hotel, and in short time, a couple of weeks before Nikola Tesla died, this Otis and Nikola Tesla met there, and he told him everything what he knew. And Otis was the mentor of this Ralph Ring, and both of them, they were very much into inventing levitating devices. And actually Ralph Ring says that they did it actually in this talk at this conference, at this UFO conference. They said that they developed a levitating device and that they were flying with it to another place in space and time. And it was so fascinating to listen to this, and I even wanted to go deeper, and I found even the how do you say, the blueprints from this device, and I forgot to download it, and a couple of weeks later it was gone, was deleted, like it evaporated, like what it happens today very often on YouTube when videos get deleted. And he even explained at this conference that he had also an encounter with the Man in Black, and he said it's not from the movie, it were some government people who wanted to destroy his prototypes.
Yeah.
So,
well, there has been a whole history of that sort of stuff happening. So I'm not sure if the guy that you was listening to, if he talked about how the first thing that happened when Tesla passed was that the suite that he had, he lived in a hotel, right? So the suite that he had, the first thing that happened was intelligent officers, the FBI officers came in and confiscated his works, his life's works, and
was just talking
they were
about.
moved. So they were moved to various military bases, and it's kind of interesting that one of those officers was the current president in the US, Trump. It was his uncle who was one of the officers that did that. But there's a book called The Energy Solution Revolution by a physicist and ex-NASA astronaut called Brian O'Leary, and he sort of catalogues, he gives the background to, you know, the various devices and discoveries that came through Tesla's works, and he did work in conjunction with some other scientists and inventors as well, and the various interferences that have happened since then, where other scientists and inventors have led on from that, how they've been raided, how some have had very suspicious demises, you know, how some have succumbed to the suggestion of selling patents for certain devices that have then been shelved and never heard of again. And you know, there's been a whole range of different ways that this has been intercepted. I think we have turned a corner in the sense that the type of pattern that you're describing, it may not be exactly the same design, but along with the disclosure that we've now seen of the cold fusion devices, free energy devices from the US, you know, I don't know if you've been following, if you've seen the announcement of the Space Force as the sixth branch of the US military. But the Space Force now has, in addition to the free energy, they've also released patents for types of vehicles that are anti-gravitational, so levitating, you know, obviously, that are able to travel at speed, not just within around our planet, but off planet and throughout the galaxy. And what's also being confirmed within those patent designs is that they have the capability to not only go off planet but go underwater, and so they've essentially mastered what we know as the Newtonian forces, where we didn't have this agreement between quantum physics and classical physics, where there was this belief that you couldn't unify electromagnetism with gravity. That has now, electrogravitics has now, you know, been confirmed in a mainstream sense that we know how that works, and we know how to sort of navigate around it. So
I mean, Ralph Ring said also in this conference that you have to believe it, that it works. You have to alter your consciousness. And for some scientists, this is a little bit strange how he expressed this whole thing, because they can't measure it. What is consciousness? And yeah, that you have to believe it, that it really works.
This is interesting, because it's what I've done recently, quite a lot of research around, is trying to pull together, whenever I look at the stuff that is more the fringe science, or the stuff that's doubted in terms of, you know, it's classed as conspiracy theory, and I always look for where there is some corroborative evidence that, although someone in the mainstream may not be speaking publicly saying this connects to that, if you understand the underlying principles, then you can see where, well, if this is true, then that would also apply to what is being at the moment dismissed as, you know, a hoax or conspiracy theory, or, you know, a lot of mainstream academics and scientists would still argue that there's absolutely no way we've got the capacity to travel off planet and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I have been looking at the work of a guy called Donald Hoffman. He's a neuroscientist, and he has been looking at the fundamental nature of consciousness from a mathematical perspective. And what he's said is that it ties in really with what quantum physics has been telling us about, you know, the nature of reality being more of a simulation, that we are consciousness first, experiencing this reality in the same fashion that you might experience a computer game sort of scenario, where we're a stream of intelligence, love, light, whatever label you want to give it, energy, that is filtering through physical, material, you know, brain body complex, and is interacting with this environment for the sake of experience, for fun, for enjoyment, for learning, you know, all these different reasons. And his research is quite expansive. What he's looked at a range of different things. What he's most well known for is looking at what our perceptual faculties, our physical powers of observation, what they're actually designed to do. So we know that when we receive, decode, and make sense of information using, for instance, our sight or our hearing, or how we physically interact with the environment around us, we know that the information that we're filtering is a very tiny fraction of all that's available to us. And he wrote a book called How Evolution Has Hid Reality from Us. It was something, I might have got that slightly wrong, but words to that effect, how evolution has hid the truth of reality from us, something like that. So I became interested in terms of, so what does he actually know about what the truth of reality is, if he knows that our evolutionary biology and process has intentionally and or successfully prevented us from truly seeing reality as it exists. So when I looked at his work, what he has said is essentially how we interact with the environments around us is very much like when we go on our computer and we have a desktop and we have icons and we know what those icons represent, and so we know how to use them for the quickest, easiest, most efficient completion of work, or to communicate with friends, or whatever it is that we want to do. We know what those icons represent, and we don't think about the coding behind it. We don't think about the various resistors and transistors and, you know, all of the mechanics of the computer. We don't expect to take the front off of the monitor that we're looking at and find a stack of papers behind the file that we know it's all digital, we know it's all symbolic, and yet that serves us because we don't want to have to think about all that stuff. All we need is to know that file means this, and if I press on it, it's going to allow me to have access to this information. And so he compares that to what the true nature of reality is. You know, we're in a matrix of various frequencies of energy and information. We have this illusion of being separate and apart from them, despite the fact that we're completely integrated within them. We are able to navigate around this physical material reality the most successfully if we don't get too caught up on too many questions of how and why and all that kind of stuff, while ever we're in a place and an environment where we're happy with what is being offered to us. Well, whatever, you know, we have this enjoyment of the stimuluses. We only really start to question the nature of reality when we're suffering or we're struggling or we're having a hard time, and we want to know, why is life offering this to me? Why is this what I'm experiencing? And that's when we tend to take a more spiritual route, and we tend to start to ask bigger questions. You know, what is this really all about? What is the overall purpose of this? And he said in his research, what he's found is that where previously academics and scientists have told us that you have physical material reality first, and from that somehow consciousness springs forth. We've never quite worked out how that happens, but we've had this notion that what we perceive to be consciousness is really just a result of interacting systems that give us this illusion of being conscious, sentient beings, and it is nature first that drives that. He said, when you calculate the equations for what we now know is the truth of reality, how it operates, it takes pages and pages and pages of equations to try to come to a sum total that explains that, to try to figure out how all the various bits and pieces, all the packets of information, waves of information, how that all comes together to give us this experience of what we perceive to be consciousness. It's very, very difficult to come to any sort of conclusive sum total that works. He said when he reverses that and he starts from the basis of, okay, everything that we perceive to be physical and real is actually an output from consciousness first. it becomes a very elegant, simple equation that really has fed into this whole idea of the entire universe ultimately being a simulation from higher intelligence that's coming from outside of space and time as we experience it. So I have become quite sold on that perspective. I feel quite strongly, confident that as we progress as a species, we're going to see more and more evidence that confirms that for us. And this whole notion of us being all that is experiencing itself in this physical form for the express reason of loving and learning and interacting with and all that kind of stuff. I think we're going to see that confirmed over and over and over again.
Yeah. I loved it also, this metaphor when you were talking like about a PC or a computer. I mean, that's my language somehow as an engineer. When you were talking about the transistors and everything. That's actually what I loved to do as a child. I loved to take everything apart and I loved to look inside the box, what is inside there. But most of the people, they don't care. They just see the screen and they want just to work with the screen, and that's what they perceive as consciousness, as you said. And I always went behind it. I always questioned it. Is that all what we what I see, or is there more behind it, or in this box?
And I can see it, particularly from your areas of expertise, how and why that would be the case. I have this thing with Get Set where people will ask me, who is it that you think is really going to be your audience? And I've always felt like it kind of breaks down into seekers, stars and geeks. And I mean that with, the utmost love and respect for each group, because the seekers tend to be those who are more spiritual in nature, and they're the more big picture thinkers in metaphysical sort of thinkers. The stars tend to be those who really just want to know what are the principles through which we can activate our highest potentials and really just love and enjoy life to the maximum. And then the geeks are those that they want to know why. They want to know how things work, why things work. And I wouldn't class myself as any sort of, thought leader or guru or expert in any particular field. But I think what I have through my own lines of inquiry and various experiences growing up and the study that I've done academically and whatnot, I feel as if somehow it's converged where I've done research around each aspect of that, because it's one thing to have a notion of there being more to life and more to us, but then you find yourself going, okay, there's a lot of skepticism as well. So now I need to qualify what I'm explaining or conveying or sharing from a more intuitive sort of level. Or, I might have read this person's works who's talking about channeling, or this person's work who's talking about interacting with ETs, and but how do I then give credibility from a place of evidence and explanation, where instead of it seeming like woo, it now becomes something that people logically can connect with and kind of wrap their minds around. So it's been a few years of studying a whole range of different disciplines from different perspectives to really try to piece it together so there is a full story,
I mean, that is a very interesting perspective, what you said, a whole range of disciplines. That's what I always think when I think about science. I mean, I'm not really a scientist officially. I mean, everyone is somehow a scientist who is researching. But what I'm saying is that most of the time, that's how it was up until now, I think, is that the disciplines, that were not really working together. And that is exactly the point where it gets important. I think that we have to integrate everything. We have to make it work together, that we really get to a higher level, how we say sometimes, like, that we really can can have these breakthroughs. Because if we see it always as a separate piece, then yeah, you can look at it, you can examine a certain area, but you will never grasp the whole thing if you don't work together.
I 100% agree with you, and I think that has been a huge part of the reason why certain discoveries have so successfully been suppressed, because what we have is incredibly bright, intelligent, capable people who are by design so compartmentalized in their studies, in their research, that I often think how quickly the whole disclosure thing would happen if we had those who are thought leaders and experts in their fields more open and aware of so much of this information, because by design, the higher you climb in a certain field, the more focused your work becomes, and the more exclusive it is to what is being discovered and what is being talked about in other fields. And of course, we're only capable of attending to so much information at any given time, and even in a lifetime. One of my favorite quotes is that, you know, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. You cannot be an expert in everything. It's impossible, particularly in this age of information where there's such a densification of so much information. It's impossible to reach a place where you know everything about everything and how everything works. So what we need is precisely that: teams of people coming from with different strengths and different insights and different areas of expertise, working in conjunction with one another, and where one person's knowledge has a scotoma or a blind spot, someone else can say, let me help you with that, because this is what I've been researching. I know this. Like, I can help you to more fully develop your ideas, discoveries, inventions, whatever it might be, through me offering you what you have not had the time and space to really discover for yourself. And we absolutely do need more of that. I'll give you one example from my own background. I talk about this on the website. I'm not sure if you'll have heard this particular sort of sharing that I gave, but when I was doing my master's in linguistics, I attended a lecture, and the course leader, who is an incredibly bright, capable linguistics researcher and professor, said, right, today we're going to talk about universal metaphors. And she sort of went into the background as to how it's so intriguing to sociolinguistic researchers that throughout various times in history, across all different cultures, all different age groups, ethnicities, you name it, we have certain metaphors that we use for things. That two particularly, we use up and down when we talk about our states. We talk about being on a high, we talk about being down in the dumps, feeling on top of the world, feeling on our backside. You know, we have this up down motion idea of whether we're prospering or struggling. We also use light and dark when we talk about positive and negative. We talk about seeing the light if we have a realization, if we access new information that's of assistance to us. We talk about, you know, being in the dark. I can't see the light. I'm in a dark space when we feel confused, when we feel you know, sort of restricted. We talk about people in terms of radiance. We'll talk about people lighting up the room when they've got a certain energy about them, filling the stage, beaming. You know, we also talk about people having a dark heart, that sort of stuff. So while I'm listening to her sort of introducing these, what she was kind of describing as, you know, we really struggle to explain this. Like, how is it that regardless
but
of
it seems
where you
that
are in
we
the world,
human beings are very visual beings.
we
We
are
talk a lot about
absolutely.
light and darkness.
Exactly. And I was thinking, I had, within, a couple of years or so of attending that lecture, I'd already started reading books like Lynn McTaggart's The Intention Experiment and Greg Braden's Divine Matrix, stuff like that, in which they described how we are biophotonic beings and dependent upon what state we're in, what state of health, what our psychology is at the time. If we're thinking and feeling positively, we literally measurably emit photons of light at a rate that is far more amplified than if we're feeling hurt, angry, scared, so I was kind of finding it a little bit strange that as she was talking about this, I'm thinking, well, you've got a PhD, highly academic, so much about human communication and behaviour, and yet it's really strange that you've not come across this research that shows measurably we emit light when we're in high-powered positive states, and that is reduced dramatically when we're in states of fear and anxiety and whatnot. So that would explain why people talk about people being radiant and why when we're in a darker space, so it then started to click for me just how different fields and different sectors do not share this information amongst themselves. People don't go, actually, this is going to help you out. You're talking about universal metaphors. Maybe you ought to know about this biological research that's been done,
I just realized I could listen out hours and hours to you, how you're talking about your experiences, about talking to people, research. Yeah, just go on, please.
So that was just an example I wanted to share, because I wholeheartedly agree with the point that you made. If we, from a human potential perspective, if we had more people researching specifically the things that they're passionate about, but sharing that information with others who are researching different fields that they're passionate about, that's one of the things, that's one of the keys to overall success in our own individual lives and us as a species on a much broader scale, is the more of us that are engaging as passions, as aspirations. There's a reason, that doesn't come from nowhere. There's a reason that we have a desire, a drive, that we're pulled towards certain activities and certain topics, and coming from a higher place of intelligence that is absolutely us just expressing ourselves through this particular form. And if we do that in conjunction with one another and work together, one of the interesting things that I see more often than not, when you talk about the disclosure thing, people then fall into the sort of political and economic arguments that well, we're never going to have full sort of unity in terms of there's too much competition, there's human beings are naturally sort of protective of their own intellectual property and or physical property and or sort of rights, and I'm trying to think of the word that I'm looking for. There's a particular word for it. We're very territorial. There's that whole argument where we have this notion that we as a species are naturally combative and violent, and it's been really entrained into us that we can never have this utopian future of everyone just helping each other out and working together. And the research that I've done proves the opposite, that we are much happier when we connect and when we work together and when we feel a sense of contribution, but know that we don't have the weight of the world on our shoulders, as in we don't have to have all the answers. We can be experts in our own particular fields and passions, and we can have faith and put trust in others to excel in their fields, and so to collectively then we have the best of all worlds.
I totally agree with that. Because the competitive part It really, I felt some resistance growing inside me. I wanted to say something, but at the same time, then you said it's actually the opposite, that we flourish when we leave this behind us, this this competition mindset, and when we collaborate and we really share with each other. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's interesting to me when I listen to people rationalize how natural it is that we have this dog eat dog sort of, you know, what this party versus that party, this country versus that country, and it's the opposite of what actually leads to us performing at optimum sort of levels. You know, if you look at positive psychology, for instance, in any particular activity, so whether it's physical prowess, whether it's cognition, creativity, problem solving, decision making, communication skills, across the board, when we're in high powered positive states that is about connectivity, support, having the state of flow, the state of ease, which can only come from feeling entrustment in those and the environments around you, that is when the outliers, you know, when we track people who just seem to perform at this incredibly high level compared to what the averages are, that's what they have learned to do. They have learned to access those states where they feel that sense of connection, that sense of trust, that knowingness that whatever it is that they're engaged in right here, right now, is absolutely the right thing for them to be doing. You know, that is what enables us to move forward in a much higher performing sort of fashion. And so many of us are so riddled with stress and worry and anxiety and what's that person doing over there, and why am I working hard and they've got all this, and you know, we're so caught up in those frequencies that it really works against us in terms of our own individual happiness and success. And it's what is being taught to us, which is a real shame. You know, that's one of the reasons that I'm doing Get Set, is really just to provide some contribution to encourage people really just to stop and question. You know, what we take for granted as normality doesn't make it natural. Normal and natural are not the same things. And however you want to look at it, whether it's deliberate or not, some people, you know, are more resistant to the idea of there being deliberate influences that have led us down a path that is working actively against our best interests. If it doesn't resonate, then fair enough, you don't have to see things that way. But what we can all agree on is that we somehow have got so far off track to what is natural for us that we've normalized destructive behaviors and attitudes, and they have now become so much a part of what is the societal norms, the systems that we're engaged in, that we've stopped questioning, you know. And I just hire.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Back again. No problem. I was
so
talking today with a coworker here at the TV station where I work, and he actually, I was telling him this is where it really starts happening, is at a very young age in our society. I experienced this with my kids when my son went to kindergarten, and the head of the kindergarten, she said to me, yeah, he has to learn how to adapt to the society. And I disagreed with her. I said, no, he doesn't have to learn to adapt to his society. There's a lot of things what he has to learn, maybe, or he wants to learn, but for sure this is one thing what I don't want to teach him, that he has to adapt to everything and everyone, and he should develop his own way of being. That is my idea from how I want to that my kids develops. And that is actually, I think, the problem, that it starts really at a very young age already. That you have to be normal, you have to be streamlined, you have to be like that. And
I love that you're pointing that out, and that it's amazing given the age of, you said it was your son, right?
yeah, he is now 4 years old, so he gets 5 years this year. But
that's incredible that you already have those insights and are instilling that, because it is so important. I come from a background of working in education, and when I was in compulsory education myself, I'm not going to lie, I never really enjoyed it, because it is so dogmatic, and it is so much about social control and knowing your place, and don't ask questions, we're giving you the answers. If you've got questions beyond that, then there's something wrong with you for asking them, because this is all you need to know. And I was quite surprised really that I went into teaching, because it wasn't my original intention. When I first went back into education, I thought I was going to work more in sort of the mental health field. I had a real interest in how we stigmatize people, and what were the causes that was creating so much instability, that people were suffering at such high levels with mental health issues. And I kind of got sidetracked from that through invitation to teach, but it still all ended up tying in, because I've still been exploring those same kind of questions, just on a broader basis. And I'm not going to lie, I feel like the modern educational systems are designed to do exactly what you've just described, which is teach people how to fit in, teach people how to function well within pre-existing systems. Now, that's all right if those systems work well, are supportive, and there is a desire to prolong them. But when you find yourself in a situation where they're not functioning for the best interests of people, and they are going to need reform, they are going to need change, then what do we need? We need people that can think outside of those systems. And when you look at anyone that's ever achieved anything of greatness, they have stood out. They haven't fitted in. They have been the ones that we see as, pioneers, and are whatever, some sort of genius, some sort of outlier. That they are the people that we're like, wow, you're so different from everyone else. So I agree. I think if you're instilling those principles in your son at this age, then there is hope for the future generations. I took my own daughter out of mainstream education as well, for the same reason. She was older, she was in secondary education, but as I've been learning and growing along the path, and I didn't know at the time, when James and Casey were preschool and just starting school, I didn't know that and what I know now. So I've sort of adapted as a parent. As I've learned more and more, I've become much more sort of like, actually, let's unravel you from some of these systems. I'm not entirely sure I'm happy with the direction they're taking.
Whenever you start, I think it's the perfect moment. You should never live in regret. Why didn't I know this earlier? I think it's perfect in this moment when you realize you want to change something. And there was something else what I just remembered, is when you said that people who really achieved something, or people who did great things, that they were thinking somehow outside of the box. And I remembered something what came to my mind. It was, I think, a song or something, a word rap from a guy called Prince EA. I don't know if you know him. He's on Facebook, quite famous. It's just Prince and then these two letters EA. That's how he calls himself. Maybe you want to look it up. He made something like, he makes word raps, I think it's called. And there was something called, called it, I am not a label. And also he is actually African American, and he said also, I'm not black. And a lot of people replied there and said, is he blind? Of course he's black. No, that's not what he meant. he meant I'm not a label. I am not this what you label me. And I half of my career, career as an engineer, I always had the label engineer, a technician, or something like that. But when I started to talk about spirituality, about this and that, about things what didn't fit into this engineering box, and people said, "This guy is strange."
I know that feeling.
What is he talking about, actually? Because most of the time I talked with engineers, with technicians, with people of this kind, and it didn't fit into the box, this spiritual talk, this consciousness talk, this yeah, what we are just talking actually since almost an hour about. And yeah.
No, I love that. It is very much, if you haven't yet got to that level of consciousness where you've integrated the truth, which is, I'm showing up as this character and I call myself Jodie Houlden, and I've had these various roles, these various boxes, people from each. I'm a mum, I'm a teacher, I'm a this, I'm a that. But I suppose David Icke says it very well when he talks about, I'm infinite consciousness, I'm everything that ever has been, ever will be, and all that is right now. Having this particular experience, there's no defining factor in that. It's not that I'm a woman, it's not that I'm white, it's not, vice versa. It's none of that is really essential to just having that I am presence of, I know I'm here playing a role, I know I'm here having this experience, and I have been many other things, I will be many more from here onwards, and there's nothing limiting about that. You recognize that is true not just for self, but for every other version of self that you meet and greet out there. It's like, I am you, you are me, we are each and all just different expressions of the same ultimate consciousness. And I think when you get to that place, first of all, there's a liberation to it, but it certainly does create a disjoint in communication with people on an everyday basis, because when they so identify with, to me, when people talk about the ego, all that they're really talking about is the illusion that you are the character that you're playing. And so when you are in communication with someone who is so fixed into that, I am this, I am a banker, I am, a Brit, I am whatever it may be, it's hard really know where to go from there, because it's not something that you can teach in a I'm going to try and tell you kind of way. It's something that person has to come to a realization themselves that they are so much more than that. And it happens for each and every one of us in its own unique way. So I get where you're coming from. You get to a place where you think, maybe I should just not engage too heavily in these conversations.
I don't fit in any box. I am too big for any box. I mean, I focus. Actually, it is what I'm saying now is from one of my mentors, but I really incorporate it in my life. I focus always on what I want to experience, and that has nothing to do with any of a label, a box, or something like this. It's just, I focus on things what I prefer, what I want to see in my life, what I want to see in the world, what I want to. When I say I want to change the world, then it means this world what I experience.
Yeah. Perfect.
Because people say all the time when I say this sentence, I want to change the world. How are you going to do this? I said, I'm doing it every day. When I get out of my bed, when I get out of my house, I change the world. And you can do it too.
Absolutely. exactly as you've said, through having that awareness of your own creative capacities, and are you consciously choosing what it is that you want to experience, and the world, the version of the world that you want to contribute to the creation of. And if that's what you're resonating with, then you are making. It's funny that you've said that. On the website, part of the free starter pack is a short mini series of how to change the world in monumental ways without massive effort, and it's exactly what you've just described, which is, it's really about what are you consciously focusing on, what is it you want to experience, what is it you know you're putting your energy and focus into creating on a broader basis in the world, and that manifests itself in tiny little everyday ways, all the way through to what you commit your life to in terms of what profession you do. Or, you know, here you are starting with this podcast, that who knows what the impact of that is going to be further down the line, what people are going to hear, how they're going to feel, what that's going to change in them. And, you know, there's so many different levels and layers to which we can do that. But you've got the simplicity down to a key.
You said it in different words, but something similar I wanted to say, that is actually the reason why I think we found together, is because we have similar intentions. You write it even on your website, you want to change the world. I wrote it in my description for my podcast, I want to change the world. So yeah, like-minded people come together, and I think that is actually what you can offer the people with your program, that you teach them how they can change the world, how you just described it, by taking little steps, small steps. And that is actually what I tried to describe before too. That it's your choice. You choose every moment, every small little moment, you choose what you want next. And even if you don't choose anything, even if you choose to do nothing, it's still a choice. And if you're aware of that, then I think you really can create the world what you want to see.
Yeah.
And each of us, and as you said, we are actually all one. We just have to recognize it.
So true. And I do believe that we are in a phase of awakening. I do feel like there are more and more people gravitating towards this kind of information. And we know, as we started this conversation, there is some heavy censorship right now to remove certain perspectives. And I think that really comes down to a fear of losing control of the direction that we as a species, as a collective, are taking. I think there are certain interests who want to kind of know they've got a handle on how things are going to play out. And I think we're going to see increasing rapidity in the rate and intensity of change that's taking place. And I think that is frightening for some people. It's exciting from my perspective. I get very happy about that.
It's especially these people who want to stay in control, who want to stay in power. They are afraid to death of these sorts, what we're just discussing. They realize that this is undermining their power. When people start to awaken and start to realize that actually, yeah, I am in power. I can change it. I just need to choose to change it.
Yeah. And so many of the solutions I've been praying for actually already exist. I just didn't know about it. Because that's the interesting thing that a lot of people will say to me. Yeah, it feels like you're covering a lot of ground. That, you know, you talk about this and now you talk about that. And the easiest way that I can explain how it all fits together is, if you imagine for decades now, there's been a push towards the discoveries of human potential, that we are more than we've been led to believe and have given ourselves credit for. And then there's this other sector or, you know, movement taking place, which is about disclosure and the various potentials that exist to us in practical solutions sort of ways, you know, technologies and whatnot. So bring the two together. What you then have is an approach where we don't only tackle what have been our own limiting beliefs about ourselves, we also have the information that allows us to tackle those collective limiting beliefs that are what the world can look like and how we can actually operate and what could truly be available to us. And I think when you take that approach where it's not just a case of, okay, I know I'm capable of more, I know I want more, but also I know that right now I'm having an experience within a world where there is the scope for each and every one of us to have, be, and do whatever it is that we want. And we only need to celebrate that and rejoice in that. And what we're then transmitting out into the world is what is going to be the transformational drive for it to actually be activated and for it to happen. And to me, there's a beautiful simplicity to all of it. But the challenge I face is communicating that where people are still, you know, very sort of fixed into more limiting belief systems. So it's finding ways that you can communicate these ideas in a way that doesn't frighten people, in a way that people don't get, you know, aggravated. I'm sure you've had that experience as well, where people can get so resistant that they're irritated by what you're saying because it's so different to what they think they know about reality. And yeah, it's trial and error at the moment. You know, Get Set is a new project, or at least it's new in the sense of I'm only just putting it out. I've been working on it for years and years, but I'm only just testing the water with people as to how they're reacting to certain ideas I'm presenting, you know. So
I just wanted to ask you actually, what do you use, especially in your programs? You were talking about tools, and how do you get people on a different level that they don't resist anymore, or that they say, okay, show me what you have to offer. Which tools should I use?
Okay, well, because we respond to different types of information and different types of experience, I do use a lot of positive visualization. And the more you can integrate that, I find with meditation, is it has an integrative effect where we absorbed higher frequencies of information that if you do it a few times over, there's lasting shifts in the frequencies of information you then consciously on an everyday basis start to access. It's kind of like creating a map. You know, if you've studied neuroscience at all, you know that we talk about the maps within the brain where we forge what are our common thought processes and belief systems. We create blueprints as to certain types of information that we are allowing ourselves access to. So if you integrate using frequencies of information through visualization, so like an example I'll give you is like quantum jumping. If you look that up on YouTube, the pioneer of that was a guy called Bert Goldman. Okay. I'd highly recommend using his techniques. There's a lot of free, you know, he has got a paid for program that's available as well that goes into more depth, but there's free information on YouTube and quite a few of his techniques that you can practice with. Another tool I would recommend that people use, and I recommend it to the students that I'm working with, is the Ho'oponopono mantra and the Mula mantra. Mula mantra is very powerful because it's uncorrupted. It's still being in Sanskrit. So there's a purity to the language that resonates on a deeper level. I recommend using, let me think. So visualizations, meditation, mantras. I'm not sure if you've heard of the emotional freedom technique. But some people refer to that as tapping. These are all types of tools that I prefer to use in a guided sense. So when I'm working with people, I'll put a session together where I walk through it with the person or the group. On a very everyday basis, listening to things like binaural beats as you're relaxing before you go to sleep, that's incredibly empowering and really does restore you to an equilibrium where energetically any disruptive, dysfunctional, sort of dense energies you've picked up through the day, let's say you've heard something on the news, it's niggling you, you've had a conflict with a friend or a co-worker, that's niggling you, you've seen something disturbing, you know, on a program you've been watching, anything like that that lingers in the subconscious, you can reset that just using binaural beats and certain light visualizations. You know, it just transmutes whatever it is that you're carrying in your system. So there's a range of different approaches. I would also recommend people, you know, try to integrate just healthy hydration, supplementation with certain vitamins.
Hydration,
I don't think there's any particular one thing that I can say to people, this one thing will put you on another level consciously. It becomes a practice that you just try different things, and then once you've mastered certain tools and techniques, you know what to go to, you know from your own intuition which to go to at what time for what purpose, if you know what I mean.
There's something what you might have seen in one of my videos, that is actually what I also learned from my mentor. He said there's a very simple tool, and it is called smiling and breathing. And when that's actually also why I called my podcast The Smiling Conscious Traveler, because I want to remind myself every day that I put a smile on my face. And when I let the breath in, then I welcome it with a smile, so that it energizes my body with this smiling energy, the oxygen what I let in. So that is,
I love that.
The idea behind it. When I take a deep breath, that I really take it with a smile.
And it does physiologically, it has such an impact for, you know, the endorphins that are released just by putting that smile on your face. You're so right, it doesn't have to be too overthought. It's nice to have knowledge and access to tools and techniques that, dependent upon, you know, whether it's deep healing or just a quick, what I call them hacks, you know, quick everyday, I need to interrupt this state, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling scared, whatever it might be. If you've got something that you can interrupt the pattern, and how much more simple and fantastic can you get than smile, shift your posture, take a nice deep breath. And I think we don't give credit to just how easy it is for us to manage our own states. I think we often, you know, I've got to see a doctor, I need counseling, I need tablets, I need this, I need that. And we ignore all of the very simple tools that are available to us.
It's all here already. I don't even need a doctor for that.
Yeah.
It's all available to me just right now.
I love that. Yeah. And I think the more people hearing it, what it does is it just reminds people on that deeper level. They think, oh yeah, I mean, I already knew that, but we get so distracted, we get so caught up with so much of the, you know, crap that's flying around us that we just don't stop. And it brings us back to what we talked about earlier. There's the normal and then there's the natural. If we didn't have all the interferences that we have, we would naturally align with those sorts of practices.
I think now I really got it. Now you said it again. That where is the difference between normal and natural? Now with this context, it really got clear to me.
Cool.
Because it's like the natural state is actually when we are born. We know it already. We don't need to learn it. I mean, a baby knows how to breathe. You don't need to teach a baby how to breathe. And that is actually the natural way.
Yeah.
This deep baby breathing. And later in life, we tend to forget how this natural way works. I mean,
It's so true.
I I just I just have this text in front of me, what you told me before the interview, when you had as a child an experience, because I was just talking about baby and children, so that's why it came to my mind. What kind of encounter was this? Can you tell me this story, because this really interests me.
Okay. Yeah, I've honestly only just started sharing this more openly because coming from a background of teaching in further and higher education, there is still a lot of stigma attached to anything that falls into the types of phenomena that we haven't as yet come to a consensus about how and why they might happen. So what had happened for me as a child, some of the earliest memories that I have is that there would be occasions, and it wasn't, an everyday occurrence, but I remember at least 3, and it could be 4. There's one of the memories is quite vague. So 3 very clear memories in my mind of being alone, on one occasion I was in my bedroom and feeling an overwhelming sense of happiness, feeling quite giddy actually, and I could feel a presence of 2 beings. One was really tall, one was shorter, around the same height that I was, and at this time I would have been about 5 years old. And I remember that I hadn't yet started full-time school, because in this interactions I felt the presence of these beings in my mind's eye. I had a very clear picture of what they looked like, but I was very much aware that I wasn't looking at them through my eyes. It was a mental image. And the presence of these beings, they had asked me if I was excited about starting school. What did I want to learn? We sort of had this interaction, and it was all telepathic, but very, very real. So that's as much as I remember. I remember showing them a book, what was my favorite book at the time, that was about dolphins, whales, and sharks. And I remember within that interaction receiving very clear information. I had showed them pictures, like pages that had got first dolphins, then whales, and energetically what I was conveying was I was very excited. I love dolphins. When I was a child, I had an obsession with them. So I was conveying that, but obviously they were just feeling that energetically from me. When we got to the sharks, the telepathic communication sort of changed. I shifted into a state of, ooh, they're a bit scary kind of thing. Now, none of this was verbalized out loud, but I felt from them a reassurance that the distinction of what I was feeling was different levels of consciousness of these various species, these various beings. Now, I'm putting this into my now adult language. How I would have explained it at the time, I'm not quite sure. There was no one I could really talk to about it, because although I came from a loving family, but we didn't talk about anything like interacting with the different types of beings. I knew it wasn't like a ghostly encounter. I knew it wasn't the presence of loved ones past or anything like that. It all felt so very real. So I remember telling my mum that I'd been playing schools, and she was like, "Oh, that's nice. Did you have a nice time with yourself?" sort of thing. And I was like, yeah, I was teaching around dolphins, So I do remember having a conversation, but realizing there was no frame of reference through which I could explain that encounter. So then fast forward a couple of years after that, I remember I was at an age where I lived, we backed onto a park. And I remember I was leaving the house with my companions, with these imaginary friends. And I'd come through the back gate of the house, and my mum happened to be coming out through the front door, and I stopped and felt embarrassed because I'd been talking to them, but I knew that she wouldn't be able to see them. So even though I was only maybe 7 or 8 at the time, I clearly had an awareness that this is not something other people know is going on, and no one else is talking about having this kind of interaction, so I probably shouldn't mention it. So that's a couple of examples of what would happen. And on that particular day, I remember that we were going for a walk, and in the communication I was having with them, they were asking me like what my thoughts and feelings were about certain views. So there was some landscapes that kind of unfolded from close to where I live. So they're asking me, you know, what are you thinking? I'm saying asking, it was kind of all just so immediate. There was no interruption to the flow of information. So they would kind of, you know, point my attention to something. I'd have an instantaneous reaction to it. And it became a dialogue between us where they were interested in what my perception of it was. And I suppose the final memory that I have was, again, going for a walk, but we'd moved house by this point, and I was walking across some fields close to where I lived, and the last memory I have was as if what I thought for a long time was an aeroplane had come really low, and my memory, I don't know if you've seen like Harry Potter and them kind of films, but you know when there's this whole notion of like everything goes blank and you just kind of, the memory fades into nothingness. That's as much as I remember from that final encounter. And I don't know, I honestly don't know if that's something I've dreamt, if I made that up, if there's a reason why that memory collapses in on itself and something happened after. I honestly don't know. But they were the encounters that have always been there in the back of my psyche. I've always like, what was that? Because it was so real. And for a long time, I felt like maybe it was an imaginary friend situation. Maybe I'm just misremembering, you know, and I didn't know what to explain it against. What has given me more food for thought now is hearing the testimonies of so many people who have had interdimensional expressive actions.
Sorry, I think you were breaking up. You're breaking up for the moment. We hope that you're coming back. So. Are you back? Do you hear me? Jodie? So I think now it's working again. You were breaking up for about 1 minute or something like that.
Oh dear. Okay, so what did we hear up to? Because I was just rambling until I realized we were frozen.
No, but it was very interesting, especially I liked this part also when you were talking about the dolphins and the sharks. And the way how you said, yeah, they are kind of scary, the sharks. I remember that I watched a video on YouTube where I think she was a scientist who was into research of marine life, and she talked about sharks, especially about the white shark, the biggest one. And she said, for them, they don't realize that, okay, if I nibble a little bit on these human beings, that they might not like it and that they might get injured or something. They don't have any bad intentions, and we are not even their favorite food. They don't like to eat us. It's just that when, of course, a lot of people would get scared if a white shark nibbles on us. And exactly this fear, what we, let's say it like, I would say it like this, what we broadcast to them, this fear encourages them to attack. It's like when I was a little child, I was always afraid of dogs, especially big dogs who were barking loud and were running to me. Of course, if you're a 5-year-old child, a dog can be very huge. And people were telling me, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. When you show the fear, then it will attack you. But at this time, it didn't help me much, this explanation. I was even more afraid when they were telling me, don't be afraid. So but I was thinking about this energy, what we send to the animal, to the other being. This energy is received. And this is how usually you would get the response from the animal.
Yeah, and it's very much, as you've said, about the interpretation, because dependent upon what our faculties are, although it's universal energy in the sense that, you know, we're all connected and it's the same fields of information that we're feeding into and receiving from, what our psychological capacities are will decide what aspects of that information and what interpretations from that information. So whether you're talking about between different species, you're feeling fear, what the dog is receiving, or, you know, whatever other type of species, what they're interpreting that as. So it could, to them, I'm speculating because I don't know much about dog psychology, but it could very well be that your nervousness, your fear translates to them as a disturbance in their field that is some sort of irritation or aggravation, and so that's what they're reacting to. And the same principles apply really within and between humans, because you can have humans on very different frequency ranges in terms of the levels of consciousness that they're tapping into, and it can create what seems to us to be miscommunication. It's not just happening on a verbal level or a physical level. It's not just, you know, the information that we're receiving through body language or whatever. There's a much more subtle level to that, where what you're giving off can have a very disturbing, distracting, irritating sort of effect to someone else if they're not on that same wavelength as you. So you can have the best intentions and they'll interpret the worst from it, and vice versa, you know. So I think it comes back to what you said as well about how we ultimately end up connecting with people that have similar aims and intentions and you know, wants and desires for what life we're constructing and whatnot, why we tend to get pulled together.
And just looking at the question, what fits perfectly in there, when people communicate, they communicate most of the time unconsciously. How would you describe the best possible way to communicate without language?
I would say, with love in your heart and a smile on your face, what you're going to transmit can only have a constructive effect, even if not interpreted and received by the other person, because it's going to depend upon their energetic systems, how much densification is in them, how toxic they are, as to whether they can receive that in a way that is in an immediate sense, on a short-term sort of basis. They may very well feel unsettled by the love and light that is being transmitted towards them, but it can only have a constructive effect in the longer term sense. It's going to unsettle something that is going to require some sort of review. And from a more universal perspective, taking the immediate interaction with that person out of the equation, what you're transmitting is information that is constructing positive potentials in the fields around you. So you become a beacon, a vessel, a vehicle, an expression of that. So you're going to feel great. It's constructive for you. Yeah. The world at large is going to benefit from it. And I would say, to communicate most effectively, taking the physical interactions out of it, it's the state that you're in. It's the place that you're communicating from in terms of your own psychology and physiology that really ultimately decides how effective it becomes.
Yeah. I'm just I was just looking at your program a little bit and how it fits all in this together, what we were talking today. It's really amazing. And I mean, you were talking today already about your program and about the tools you are using to help people to achieve this better communication also, and that to change their lives actually. And I think I want to put actually a link also in below this this recording, so that people can figure out actually what you're doing and if it's for them. Because
thank you very much.
Yeah, I really resonate with this, what you're doing. I mean, honestly, it's I was reading through your website and it was like, that is actually what I'm doing lately, and this is what I want to experience. It's so amazing that we really came together and that we are talking about all these great topics today. So I think for today we really covered a lot of topics, and I think if you really want to, can come together and we do another podcast.
Absolutely, I'd love that. Yeah, and I've so enjoyed the interview. It's just felt very natural, casual, conversational. It's, I'm not practiced in interviews, so I want to thank you for the skills and the preparation and for the leading of it. It's been wonderful, and I would absolutely be happy to do another podcast in the future.
I will be honest with you, it's my first podcast here, and I am amazed too how well everything went. And I'm really happy about that. And yeah,
because you're going to have loads more coming up. I can see this being a very popular podcast.
That is actually what people tell me. I love your honesty. And even if I am live on a podcast now, I am this, I don't want to change it. I am this person. I am genuine, I'm authentic. That's who I am, and I'm honest. And I'm letting people know what I think.
Yeah, and that's what we need more of. More of the fake news, fake media. This is what we need, is people having real conversations and talking about topics that aren't being explored in a mainstream sense.
It's really amazing. Is I before I started this podcast, I asked a lot of people about their feedback and what they want to hear, and it's exactly this what you just said. They want to hear genuine conversations with authentic people, with real stories, and yeah, that's what I want to deliver. So,
well, from where I'm sitting, you're doing a great job, Otmar. Thank you again for the invitation. And just let me know. I know you're going to be very busy and you're going to have many different guests, but just let me know whenever you would like to do a follow-up. That'd be great.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that.
Lovely.
Okay, so have a nice day, and we'll see each other for sure soon.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and you too. Bye.
Bye.